I'm going to dedicate my remarks to two people I met who met me yesterday at the airport. We arrived here in Lincoln. We came through a huge storm cloud, which for the life of me I was sure was a tornado. And we bounced and bounced and bounced and landed beautifully. The sky cleared, and we were met at the airport by an athlete, a Special Olympics athlete from Indiana, and a Special Olympics athlete from Minnesota, Martha and Sandra. Do I have that right?
Jessica.
Sorry, Martha and Jessica. Jessica I met for the first time last night. And Martha, I've known for some time. Martha I call, and this is something I recommend for all of you, she's my smile coach. And she is a person who has an enormous enthusiasm for life and always makes me smile, so we kind of came up with this designation. So now she sends me emails all the time, and they're smile coaching emails, and I promise you, if anybody wants to be on the distribution list, you can ask Martha. If you're ever having a rough day or an uneven start or an uneven finish, you just get a smile coaching tip from Martha, and your day will be better. So I want to dedicate this in part to Martha. And Jessica, who I just met for the first time last night, who was so excited, is a global messenger from Indiana, so excited to meet me and my daughter and colleagues on the board and so on. And then just before we got into the car, and by the way, beautifully, I don't know how to quite say this in the way it doesn't sound silly, but beautifully made up, and is a person who obviously loves the color pink. So she has pink in it. She's about maybe 30, but she has, pink eyeshadow and, a pink thing in her hair, and she's got a kind of a pink top and pink nails and stuff, and beautiful. So she's very exuberant and excited. And then she says to me, but I want to just say before you go, I want to say, I have a problem. And I said, oh, okay. And then she described in the course of 90 seconds maybe that she'd been institutionalized for anxiety and depression, that her parents thought she belonged in an institution, that she'd moved into a supported apartment setting, that she cried every day because she was called a retard by the other people in the setting whenever she runs into people in the elevator, that she'd become the victim of sexual harassment and assault in that facility by another person who lives there who'd manipulated her with money and other things into becoming a victim of obviously very painful. She began to cry almost uncontrollably. And at the end said, I'm so excited to be here. Special Olympics is my life. But I don't want it to end. So I just have been obviously very affected by these meetings, these two wonderful human beings, both full of life, both full of talent, skill, energy, but dramatizing, I think, for me in a very powerful way, a hope and a challenge. Two women eager to live full lives, eager to fulfill the goal that Dr. Evans laid out for us at the end of his presentation. Full inclusion, acceptance, integration. But we've got work to do. So let me go a little bit into a couple of very quick points. This is a photograph from our movement, the Special Olympics movement. It's a photograph that was taken at the 1995 Special Olympics World Games, and it's the opening ceremonies. And took place at Yale Bowl, and Yale Bowl is a little bit of a rundown stadium, but we packed it with about 75,000 people, athletes all on the field. And you might be able to see if you've got good eyes, although I'm struggling with all sorts of corrective issues now with my gray hair, as Corbin pointed out, unfortunately. You can see that Bill Clinton is on the Jumbotron, and that's because he was the first president ever to attend a Special Olympics opening ceremony. So he came, and for security reasons, this is obviously pre-9/11, but they still kept him at the very top row of the stadium. So he wasn't able to go down on the field at all, wasn't able to mingle with the athletes. The athletes were all on the field, about 6,000, and they'd all been given single-use cameras by a sponsor at the time. And the old days weren't digital, the film ones. And the sponsor, I don't mention the sponsor because they dropped us. So they get no credit. But all the athletes had these single-use cameras. They were yellow cameras, by the way, if you want to know who dropped us. But so the reason I love this photograph is because down on the field, there's all these athletes with cameras, and one of our professional photographers is down there and sees a group of the athletes from a delegation, looks like a delegation from Africa, can't quite tell, looks over and he sees about 12 of them, and they've all got their cameras up, and they're all looking up to get a picture of the president, who's at the top row, but they've all got their cameras backwards. So they're all holding up their cameras, and the lenses are on their noses. And so the photographer realizes that they've never used a camera before, and they're taking pictures of their own noses instead of getting pictures of the president. So he goes over, not knowing whether there's a language barrier, and says, you're using the camera, and the athlete sort of gesticulates and says, you're trying to get a picture of the president, athlete sort of gesticulates. And he says, but you've got to turn the camera around, and then the lens will point up, and you'll get a good picture of the president. And the athlete goes, oh, thank you. He says, but if you turn the camera backwards and look through the viewfinder, it works just like binoculars, and you can see the president really well. So I love this story. I love that story because it, for me, tells us right out of the gate, this is not a movement for them. This is not a movement we don't need a movement for people with intellectual disabilities. We might have needed one when Beatrice State's institution had 2,300 residents, but the closing of that institution marked the beginning of the era of us. On that field, there was maybe a service being provided. People think of Special Olympics as giving an opportunity to this population. But on that field, to me, there was a change taking place for everyone. This, I like to say, is no longer the challenge of doing something for them, somebody else. This is awakening us to the challenge for all of us. A challenge of change in attitude, a challenge of high expectations, a challenge of modifying the way we think, feel, create communities, and conduct ourselves that affects us every bit as much as it affects them. In fact, in the end of the day, the whole purpose of being here is to break down the barriers between them and us, so it's all us. Our movement has been, in a way, engaged in that attitudinal shift for a long time. This is a picture of what takes place 40,000 times a year, 44,000 times to be precise in the year 2009. 44,000 Special Olympics events that look something like this. They look like that prior slide too, but a lot of them look like this. Rural field in Uganda, one coach, a well-trained volunteer. You can see he's made lines on the track, and out from probably an orphanage, maybe a special school, maybe knocking on doors with moms and dads, come a handful, a dozen children who have an intellectual disability, and they're being invited to run. And all of you are experts in this room, so you know in looking at them that maybe they got a diagnosis, maybe it was at birth, maybe it was shortly after birth. You know that they probably have a hard time forming friendships. You know that there are very little educational opportunities. You know that it's a hard challenge maybe for mom and dad. You know that they don't necessarily get invited to all the parties that other kids go to, get invited and included in all the activities that other children go to. But we bring them to the starting line, and we sound a gun, or we cheer and say, ready, set, go, and they run. And our vision is that in these moments, there's an identity shift almost. That someone who is a person with a disability, or worse, a retarded person, or a defective person, or a feeble-minded person, or an idiot person, or an imbecile person, or all this language that we all carry around, even today. This is a person who has this. In this moment, the person is an athlete, not does sports, not watches sports, not plays sports, but is. Loretta Claiborne famously said, what Special Olympics gave me the chance to do is say, I am an athlete. Not I do it, not I participated in, I am. It's an identity shift. And our vision, our hope, our moment of transformation, we hope, is that all that isolation and vulnerability and baggage is first cast off by the athlete. Because none of us can help internalizing what everybody tells us about ourselves, right? We can't help it. I mean, unless we're really tough. If you get arrows all day long, if you get told all day long back at the bus, if you get told all day long you can't read, you can't run, you can't write, you can't ride the bus, you can't work, you're the slowest, you're the last pick, you can't help, for most of us, but internalizing it. And on that field, our vision, our hope, our passion is you let it go. You are invited to define yourself. Define your time, your race, your competition, become an athlete. That energy is what we believe is at the core. It's the athlete's energy to define him or herself as a person of worth, value, competence, skill, a winner, a person of bravery, of effort, a person as a teammate. It's that effort that has created this movement that we're all a part of in one way or another. 44,000 events, as I said earlier, around the world and regional games of which we're a part of today. Almost 5 million athletes, almost 1 million volunteers and coaches who support those athletes in these events. And importantly, this last point, what we hope is the creation of a deep value proposition. That in these events, we hope not just to run a sporting competition, but to create a deep community value. And as a result, we believe it's critical that at these events, in and around these events, we create opportunities for athlete leadership. So athletes don't just play, they officiate. They don't just officiate, they become photographers. They're not just photographers, they're bloggers. They're not just bloggers, they're writers. They're not just writers, they're speakers. They're not just speakers, they're serving on boards of directors. They're not just serving on boards of directors, but they're in paid professional positions. So it's not just to put the athlete over there so we can watch and cheer and go, oh, that's nice. It's to put the athlete at the center of the change experience, at the center of the community experience, so that that vision that Dr. Evans spoke of, we begin to model and we begin to facilitate. That's supported by lots of work in family support, in education, and of course what we're going to talk more and more about today is health. Now, I would say 15 years ago my presentation could have stopped here. That's Special Olympics. I could show you, and by the way, I love that fishing thing where you can just drop in the fishing pictures over and over again, no matter, just like every other slide could be like, just a fishing expedition, which I love. But we could have stopped here, but in 1995 we had a stunning, for me at least, stunning experience. And that's when Steve Perlman and Paul Berman, two dentists and an optometrist, came and said, let's open up in Olympic Town a screening center. We can do some health education around oral health and do some eye exams and help athletes get some glasses, some sunglasses, stuff like that. We'll have a lot of fun. Everybody had a great time. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, came and visited. She had a great time. Athletes had a great time. And then we said, let's look at the data. 15% of the athletes screened randomly. Now, keep in mind, these are athletes at a Special Olympics World Games. They've gotten on planes, they've gotten medicals, they've got coaches, they've accessed community resources, they're fully integrated in in the life of their families, they're traveling around halfway around the world, some of them, and they chance in, just by chance, into a screening center, and 15% of them go to the emergency room. When somebody told me the room was just like this. So what are you talking about? For what? Did they get injured on the field? No. Oral disease, pain, acute disease. Almost a third of them had untreated vision problems. And you can see the rest of this data. For me, it was an eye-opener.